This is Viewpoint, now in its 44th year.
Hello and welcome to Viewpoint. We followed Senator Crapo to Twin Falls this week for one of several town hall meetings he's holding during the August congressional recess. We can't bring you the entire 90-minute discussion, but for the next few minutes, we can give you an idea of the questions Idahoans are asking and the thoughts Senator Crapo is sharing as he travels the state. We take you now to the Fine Arts Auditorium of the College of Southern Idaho, where the first topic was Senator Crapo's vote in favor of raising the debt ceiling.
And so there were reasons to vote for it, and there were reasons to vote against it. Our delegation from the 2nd Congressional District, as well as our 2 senators, decided to vote for it. But each of us had misgivings about whether it was sufficient or not, or whether we should take the next step or not. And ultimately we decided that, we are not going to fix this problem in one step only. And so we're going to take this victory, and it is a big change, and we're going to fight forward from there. Last thing I'll say is this. One other very important reason exists for, I believe, why we all voted for this. I supported it, why I supported it, and that is we created a precedent. Never in the history of the country, as we have faced the debt ceiling, have we insisted on fiscal reforms to accompany it. In this case, there were more reductions in the spending path of our country than there were increases in the debt ceiling. And if we follow that precedent, every time we deal with the debt ceiling in the future, we will balance the budget in 10 years. Just that one precedent. And so it was, in addition to all of the other factors, that factor was one that I thought was important. I want to give a lot of credit to what's been called the Tea Party. Today, in Congress, we are banking reductions in spending. We put $2.5 trillion of reductions in spending on the table with this last vote. But the entire debate is now, how much do we reduce spending? And how do we reform our fiscal policy? And how do we reform our tax code, not increase tax rates? And I attribute that to the Tea Party.
But as the Q&A got underway, one person wanted a further explanation of Crapo's vote to raise the debt ceiling, asking him if he's confident his vote reflects the wishes of his constituents.
On this particular issue, the input I was getting was very strong on both sides. I'll be very candid with you about that. There are people who felt that it wasn't enough. In fact, earlier when I went through the negatives and the positives, there were a lot of negative reasons, and there were, in my opinion, a lot of positive reasons, and the input I was getting from my constituents was both. I do believe that the majority of the input that I was getting was in favor of this kind of a solution, although virtually everybody wanted a much bigger solution, and I did too. And so the question came down to whether we are going to say no until there's a perfect immediate solution that solves every aspect of it, or whether we're going to take the victory that we have, put it under control and move forward. I know that may or may not be satisfactory to you, but it was a tough vote, to be honest. I think every member of our delegation felt torn as to whether or not to support something that they knew was not sufficient, or to say no when they knew the consequences that would be caused by that would be very, very damaging economically. And some say that. Some say that we should have let it go. And I understand the argument.
The senator's willingness to put future cuts to entitlement programs like Social Security on the table as a member of the Gang of Six also came up. This voter voicing what polls show, a skepticism that Congress is willing to take the cuts it's talking about dishing out.
So I want to know how much Congress is going to cut from their benefits and salaries, and how many people here would vote for a cut to the military, Social Security, education, all the other cuts. And how many people here would vote for the Senate and the House also to take some cuts?
Again, a very, very common sentiment that many people feel. And as a result of that, as I said earlier, I believe anything that Congress does with regard to Social Security, which many people think that members of Congress don't participate in Social Security, that we have a special plan, and we do participate in Social Security. Anything we did on Social Security should apply to Congress as well. Anything we did on retirement benefits should apply to Congress as well. And in the Gang of Six plan, which I support, we require that Congress have a 3-year, members of Congress have a 3-year freeze on their salaries, which is far more than would be asked of anybody. in the current proposals. In other words, what I think is that the members of Congress have to lead in this. And whatever they propose to happen to someone else, they should propose at least that much, if not a deeper cut or freeze in their case, or a deeper cut or a longer freeze in their case. And I think that ultimately, no matter what happens, that's how it will have to turn out. Just the same way we had in the health care battle, the way the bill was originally written, Congress was exempted. And many people still believe it is because that's the way it was originally written. But many of us said, no, if we're going to do this to the American people, which we shouldn't, but if we are, then Congress ought to be hit by it as well. And that's the way it should be across the board in whatever Congress does to deal with the debt ceiling.
I heard you speak maybe 3 months ago, and you said the primary way that you got things done here in the state of Idaho was compromise, giving a little here, getting something that you wanted, letting the other person have a little what they wanted, so that progress continued. What now in Washington? You talked about a poison pill. Groups or people who refuse to negotiate, who say, I will not give, and that stops all kinds of progress. It appears to me that maybe that's what's happening in Washington. What now?
I believe that my record is one of developing collaborative decision-making efforts to build consensus around win-win solutions. Occasionally that involves compromise in the sense of allowing one side to achieve some of their objectives and another side to achieve some of their objectives and see if you can build a positive path forward. And I certainly don't oppose that when it can happen. But it's very important to point out that there's another way to do it too. And that is to build win-win solutions where both sides achieve their objectives. The example that I want to use in this case is the idea that I talked about at the outset. Just take one of the biggest poison pills, if you will, one of the biggest gridlock factors we have is the question of how do we deal with taxes? Do we raise them on the so-called wealthy, or do we reduce taxes, or how do we approach it? If we stay in the traditional tax debate box of do we raise taxes or not, we will continue to run into gridlock, in my opinion. But if we look at a way to get outside that box, the one side wants revenue from tax policy, the other side wants growth and strengthen the economy from tax policy, and we can achieve that through tax reform that actually reduces the tax exemptions, credits, and deductions in the code, but replaces them with reduced tax rates that represent a tax cut for the vast majority of Americans. To me, that kind of thinking is a way to get win-win solutions that actually allow both sides to achieve their objectives. And we are building those kinds of positive, bipartisan proposals and solutions to move forward in Washington. So I personally believe that that kind of thinking is the way that we must continue to try to go. We've got to find win-win solutions that allow people to achieve their objectives without forcing one side to be a winner or one side to be a loser at the expense of another side that is perceived to be the winner. I don't believe we will ever get there if that's the paradigm of decision making that we use. And we are unfortunately locked in that kind of a paradigm right now. Now, I'm working to try to get us out of that paradigm, but there is an awful lot of resistance to that. And the resistance is from those who are invested in some part of the status quo that don't believe that we can protect their interests while moving forward in a more consensus-based win-win solution.
Several attendees wanted to know how Senator Crapo would save certain federal programs. This gentleman asked what Crapo would do to preserve national service programs that utilize volunteers and ultimately save the government money.
Well, first of all, let me say the most important thing that we could do to save these programs, or frankly any aspect of the federal system that individuals are committed to, is to deal with our national debt. And I can't emphasize enough that if we don't take the steps necessary to control our debt and literally change the fiscal paradigm in the United States, that we will not be able to sustain the way of life we have in the United States.
Well, when we come back, I had an opportunity to interview Senator Crapo right after the town hall meeting concluded. That interview in its entirety when we come back.
I think that the American dream is literally on the line. We must deal with our national debt. That's going to involve austerity at a level that Americans are not accustomed to.
Senator Mike Crapo addressing a town hall meeting in Twin Falls this past week, emphasizing the dire predicament he believes we are in as a nation. Welcome back to Viewpoint. Just moments after that town hall meeting concluded, I had an opportunity to interview the senator, and I started by asking him if he thinks Idahoans are taking his warnings seriously, especially given the sparse turnout in Twin Falls.
No, I'm not. As a matter of fact, the input to my office has gone up 800% over normal. And frankly, I think Idahoans get it. Of course, just like any population, there are going to be some who aren't as focused as others. But Idahoans have a common sense that is just wonderful. And they're worried. They're very worried because the threat is so large.
So when you say they're worried, what are they doing? I mean, they're communicating with you, obviously, but what else do you sense is happening out there at the grassroots level? You're encouraging that kind of activity. What do you think's happening?
Well, I think they are getting engaged and involved. I haven't counted the entirety of them, but I think there's something like 8 or 10 Tea Party groups in Idaho that have started. There are many others who are not calling themselves a Tea Party who have started to organize, and many who don't join a formal group, but who are just getting engaged. Like I said, 800% increase in the input to my office over this issue compared to normal. And I believe that Idahoans are very involved and will increasingly be involved. And in addition, they're talking among each other. So I just really believe that Idahoans are doing what they always do. They're managing their lives the way we ought to be managing our life at the federal level. And they are weighing in increasingly, expecting us to do the same.
You know, you're known as a senator who does have that collaborative spirit, and you've made it work on a number of occasions. You voted for the debt ceiling, which I sense was a way for you to somehow collaborate and move us forward. But a lot of times the folks who are involved in the Tea Party, the people who come out and criticize that vote, are the very people who say, you shouldn't collaborate, take a stand. Voting for that debt ceiling was the wrong thing to do, yet you're very complimentary of the Tea Party. How do those two things jive?
Well, first of all, these are tough issues. And it's not the kind of circumstance where it's obviously all one way or all the other way. As I said to this group, the decision as to whether to vote for or against the solution that was put forward last week was a tough one for me and every member of our delegation. But the bottom line here is that even among the Tea Party group, you know, the Tea Party is not a monolithic entity. Even among Tea Party members, there are different points of view. I think almost 65% of the Tea Party, the people elected to this Congress by the Tea Party, the new members, so to speak, voted in favor of the solution last week. Not because they liked it, but because they wanted to make sure that we made progress and kept the battle moving forward. So, you know, we can have disagreements in America and here in Idaho about how we should best move forward and when it's time to bank some progress and then move on to the next step. But ultimately, you know, we're all in this together and we're all on the same team, and I think Idahoans know that.
Now, you talked tonight about needing to move the country from a win-lose paradigm to a win-win paradigm, and I think everyone would agree that would be a great thing to see happen. But I still don't quite understand how you think we can get there when it seems as though we are so entrenched in this gridlock that absolutely the whole country is getting frustrated with, and you heard it tonight.
Oh, yes. Very great frustration. Well, I think the way we get from a win-lose situation to a win-win situation is to identify the issues which are causing the gridlock. On the one hand, it's the notion that we've got to raise taxes to solve a big part of our problem by raising more revenue and taxing the so-called wealthy. And on the other hand, it's the notion that we must not deal with the entitlements, and that our entitlements are a sacred cow, if you will, that we cannot touch. We have to realize that in both cases, a failure to solve the problem will be worse than doing nothing at all. I mean, than any solutions that are being proposed. In other words, in both cases, a failure to solve the problem will be worse than any actions that are being proposed to solve the problem. And on the tax front, as I indicated, I think the solution there is to recognize the dynamic growth that can come from tax reform. And we are actually getting bipartisan support for that notion, that we could actually reduce tax rates and grow the economic pie, making America stronger. And on the entitlement front, I think it involves making sure that we recognize that we are willing to protect that safety net that people are so worried about for those that cannot make it otherwise. And there are ways to do that. There are ideas that were brought out here in this meeting about how we could achieve phenomenal savings in Medicare and in Medicaid without reducing the benefits and or adjusting the way that benefits are applied in such a way that we achieve results rather than focusing on processes or procedures. And so there are solutions out there that really are win-win, that increase efficiency, that reduce the national debt, and actually make America stronger. And it's getting outside of the box, if you will, and looking at solutions to these gridlock causes in a way that will help us to build a win-win solution.
And you can stand here tonight after being on the President's Debt Reduction Commission, being a member of the Gang of Six, and you can still stand here tonight and say you really think we can find a solution to this?
I believe we can. I'm not going to tell you that I think that the politics are going to allow us to get there, but I won't tell you that they won't either. And the reason I say that is because the threat that we face is as big a threat as I believe America ever has faced.
Do you think your colleagues believe that too?
Increasingly.
Democrat and Republican?
Yes. I wouldn't say 100% of them, probably not even 75% yet, but we're getting there. In other words, the attention to this issue is growing by leaps and bounds, not only in the Senate and the House, but in America in general. And they understand that. And the fact of the imminency and the scope of the threat that we face is something that I think will cause the members of Congress to very seriously look at finding those win-win solutions. And let me just make this point. You know, the Gang of Six has been maligned. As I said here, you know, once we put our proposal out, all of the traditional political interest groups became active, and the knives came out and the attacks came in. And frankly, you might have thought, well, gee, can you really build a bipartisan solution without just getting brutalized by the American political system? Probably not. But does that mean that you can't build a bipartisan solution that will gain momentum? I don't think it means that you can't do it. I think that if you look at what we're doing, there are at least 30, if not 40 or 50 senators, about evenly balanced between the two parties, who think that the paradigm that we've been working on is the solution for the country.
So why weren't you put on this super committee now that's supposedly going to come up with the big answer? I mean, you've been working on this a long time.
Well, I don't know the ultimate reason, but I could probably say, first of all, that our leader, Mitch McConnell, had 3 picks. And he had to balance that among many different factors. And so the odds were slim that any senator would get the appointment. I had already been selected for the last commission and was already involved in a group that was advocating a specific proposal. So it very well may be that, knowing that our group was going to be heavily involved in whatever happened with regard to this new committee, that was a consideration. I don't know. It might also have been, frankly, that the politics around the Gang of Six are so toxic because, as I've said, we put everything on the table. Every political action interest in America is out on the fight. And it may be that importing that battle into this new committee right from the outset was something that our leaders didn't want to do. So I can see a number of reasons. I don't know which one it might be. But the bottom line is that doesn't mean that I or any other senator is precluded from being involved. And I fully expect that the Gang of Six, and frankly I think it's going to be much more than 6, are going to be very involved in bringing this proposal forward for consideration.
So it's still relevant?
Oh, very relevant. In fact, I think it's the most powerful solution on the table still.
Well, I just want to let you wrap up our quick interview here by telling me, you know, we are heading into a presidential election. A lot happening in the last couple of weeks in your party along those lines. It was touched on tonight. What kind of leader does your party need to put on that ballot to move forward and out of this gridlock that is so much a part of the conversation?
Well, I have not committed to a specific candidate yet, so not having made an endorsement, I won't be doing that tonight either. But I'll tell you, the kind of person that the Republicans need on the ballot is someone who is very deeply founded in the kind of conservative fiscal policy and conservative principles of government that are traditional for the Republican Party, and that is limited government and fiscal responsibility. and one who can convince those who are becoming more and more concerned about it across the country, particularly among independent voters, that he or she is committed to the kind of fiscal reform in this country that will involve a paradigm shift in America with regard to that kind of fiscal policy, but also a candidate who is willing to work outside the traditional box, if you will, as I've described earlier. A candidate who is willing to say, look, we can come together as a nation, and we can heal differences, and we can find those collaborative, common sense-based solutions that provide a win for both sides. We don't need to be in that win-lose mode of decision making. We can find win-win solutions. There are some out there already, and we can move forward as a nation. Somebody who can capture the confidence of the American people that they have the foundation principles that are the base that is needed, and the ability to build consensus.
Do you see somebody like that in your party right now?
I see 3 or 4, but I'm not going to give names right now. Actually, I actually see a number who I think have that capacity.
Well, Senator Crapo, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.